August 9, 1942, the Tenarú River, Guadalcanal. The air is thick enough to drink. A suffocating wet heat presses down on the men of the 1st Marine Division, turning their herringbone twill uniforms into a second, clammy skin. Every sound is alien, the shriek of unseen birds, the maddening buzz of malarial mosquitoes, the rustle of foliage that could be the wind, or it could be something else. This is Guadalcanal, a name that means nothing to them yet, but will soon become a synonym for hell itself. 2 days ago, they landed. The main Japanese force, a construction unit building a strategic airfield, was taken by surprise, melting into the jungle that now surrounds the Marines. The objective, the airfield, now christened Henderson Field, is secure, but the jungle belongs to the enemy. It is a living, breathing entity, and it is hostile. Private First Class William Sully. Sullivan, barely 19, shifts his M1 Garand, the stock slick with sweat. His squad is on patrol, a few hundred yards past the established perimeter. The order is simple: probe, assess, and report. But how do you assess an enemy you cannot see? The jungle swallows platoons whole. Paths that look clear one moment dissolve into a wall of green the next. Visibility is 10 feet, maybe 15 if you're lucky. Every shadow, every vine, every rustle of a palm frond sends a jolt of pure adrenaline through a man's veins. Their boots sink into the mud, a dark, grasping mire that pulls at them with every step. Lieutenant Red Corrigan, a wiry man with eyes that have seen too much in too little time, holds up a hand. The patrol freezes. The silence that follows is more terrifying than any noise. It's a predatory silence. "Point," Corrigan whispers, gesturing to Corporal Jensen. "What is it?" Jensen doesn't answer. He's staring at a section of the path ahead. It looks no different from any other stretch of mud and decaying leaves. He takes another cautious step, his eyes scanning the ground. Then he sees it. A thin, almost invisible piece of vine, stretched taut about 6 inches off the ground. It's tied to the base of a coconut palm on one side of the path and disappears into a tangle of ferns on the other. It looks natural, like 100 other vines they've stepped over today. But this one is different. It's too straight, too deliberate. This was a new kind of warfare, one not taught at Paris Island. Nothing in their training had prepared them for an enemy who weaponized the ground itself. The Japanese soldier was proving to be a master of what the military would later call asymmetric warfare. Lacking the industrial might and logistical support of the American war machine, they turned to ingenuity and cruelty. Their strategy was not just to kill, but to maim, to terrorize, and to turn the jungle into a psychological weapon that would bleed the Marines one man at a time. Back on the Tenarú, Corrigan follows Jensen's gaze. He sees the vine. A cold knot tightens in his stomach. He'd heard whispers from the veterans of the Philippines, stories of traps, but had dismissed them as battlefield rumors. Now the threat is here, silent and waiting. He signals for the men to back away, slowly, carefully. But as PFC Sully takes a step back, his boot heel catches on a different vine he hadn't seen. There's a faint click. The sound is small, almost insignificant in the vast, noisy jungle. But to the men of the squad, it's as loud as a thunderclap. For a split second, everyone freezes. They look down. Half buried in the mud by Sully's boot is a metal canister, innocuous, like a discarded can of rations. A thin wire, rusted and almost invisible, snakes from it, disappearing under the leaves. It's a Model 97 fragmentation grenade. The Japanese had learned to rig them with a simple tripwire, placing them in improvised tubes made of bamboo or even empty shell casing so they would detonate instantly when disturbed. There is no time to yell, no time to run. The jungle erupts. A blinding flash, a deafening roar, and a spray of superheated steel shrapnel rips through the air. Sully is lifted from his feet and thrown backward. The man next to him screams, a horrible, choked sound, as the metal fragments tear through his legs. The patrol is thrown into chaos. Men dive for cover, not knowing if the explosion was a single trap or the prelude to a full-scale ambush. They are blind, deafened, and terrified. Corrigan, his ears ringing, crawls toward the sound of the screaming. He finds one of his men writhing on the ground, his uniform soaked in blood. Of Sully, there is only a mangled heap. The central question posed by this new, insidious threat was terrifyingly simple. How do you fight an enemy who is everywhere and nowhere at once? How do you advance when every single step could be your last? For the Marines on Guadalcanal, this was a question they would have to answer with their blood. The Japanese weren't just defending the island, they were making the island itself the weapon, and it was just the beginning. The simple but effective traps on Guadalcanal were a proving ground. As the island-hopping campaign pushed closer to Japan, from the razor-sharp coral of Peleliu to the volcanic ash of Iwo Jima, the defenders' desperation and ingenuity would grow, turning entire islands into sophisticated, multi-layered killing fields. The war against the hidden killers had just begun. The journey back to the perimeter is a descent into paranoia. Every man in Corrigan's patrol now sees the jungle differently. The vibrant green is no longer a backdrop. It is a curtain hiding 1,000 points of death. The ground beneath their boots is not solid earth. It is a fragile crust laid over a web of triggers and explosives. They carry their wounded comrade on a makeshift stretcher, each man's eyes locked on the few feet of terrain in front of him, searching for the telltale shimmer of a wire, the unnatural disturbance of leaves, the glint of metal in the mud. They move at a snail's pace, the humid air thick with unspoken terror. An hour-long patrol turns into a 4-hour ordeal. By the time they stumble back through their own lines, the survivors are hollow-eyed, their faces etched with a new kind of fear, one that machine guns and mortars could not inspire. This fear began to spread like a contagion. The incident on the Tenaru was not an anomaly, it was a declaration. Similar reports trickled in from other patrols along the Lunga perimeter. A Marine reaching for a seemingly discarded Japanese helmet, only to have it explode in his hands. A squad taking cover behind a fallen log, triggering a pressure plate made from a buried artillery shell. These were not random acts of sabotage. They were the calculated tactics of an outnumbered and outgunned, yet fanatically determined foe. Deep within the jungle, Sergeant Kenji Watanabe of the Imperial Japanese Army Engineers inspects his handiwork. He is not a monster. In his own mind, he is a craftsman, an artist of attrition. His materials are whatever he can salvage. Unexploded American bombs, his own army's Type 97 grenades, artillery shells, and the raw materials of the jungle itself, bamboo, vines, and coconuts. He feels no malice, only a cold, professional pride. The Americans have endless supplies, ships that blot out the horizon, and planes that own the sky. He has the jungle. He has his ingenuity. He carefully hollows out a thick stalk of bamboo, packing it with dirt and inserting a grenade, its pin connected to a vine stretched across the path. He calls this the bamboo spear. He sharpens dozens of smaller bamboo stakes, fire hardens their tips, and plants them at the bottom of a concealed pit, often smearing the points with filth to guarantee infection. But his true masterpiece is the castrator mine. He takes a Type 99 Kiska grenade, known for its small size and instant detonation, and mounts it on a stake driven into the ground at groin height, the tripwire set knee-high. It is a weapon designed not just to kill, but to inflict a uniquely psychological wound, to unman the enemy in the most literal sense. For Watanabe, this is not cruelty, it is warfare. It is turning the enemy's momentum, their confident strides through his jungle, into their own destruction. Back in the American lines, the response is one of grim adaptation. The role of the point man, once just the lead position in a formation, is transformed into a specialized high-stakes profession. It is a job for the man with the sharpest eyes, the steadiest nerves, and an intuitive sense of danger. It is a job no one wants. After the Tenaru patrol, Corporal Jensen, the man who first spotted the tripwire, becomes that man for his squad. He walks 10 yards ahead of everyone else, a solitary figure upon whom a dozen lives depend. He learns to read the jungle's grammar. He looks for things that are out of place, a vine that is too straight, a patch of leaves that is too neat, a clump of dirt that is too fresh. He uses a long branch to probe the ground ahead of him, sweeping it gently from side to side, feeling for the tautness of a wire. The mental strain is immense. Every second is a life or death calculation. The sweat dripping into his eyes isn't just from the heat, it's from the sheer crushing weight of concentration. One sweltering afternoon in late September, Jensen's squad is tasked with clearing a path toward a ridge overlooking Henderson Field. The terrain is a nightmare of roots and gullies. Jensen moves with a practiced, almost hypnotic slowness. He spots the first one, a wire thin as a hair, glinting in a stray sunbeam. He freezes, signals back to Corrigan, and carefully marks it with a strip of white cloth. A few yards later, another. Then a pressure plate, clumsily hidden under a scattering of dirt. He feels a surge of confidence. He understands the rules of this deadly game. He can beat them. Then he sees something that makes the blood drain from his face. From the trigger of the pressure plate he just marked, he spots another, thinner wire. It doesn't run across the path. It runs sideways, disappearing into the undergrowth. Following it with his eyes, he sees it connect to another device. And from that one, another wire branches off. It's not a series of individual traps. It's a network, a web. Disarming one might do nothing, or it might trigger them all. The Japanese hadn't just booby-trapped the path, they had wired the entire jungle floor. They were standing in the middle of a complex, interconnected system of explosives, a single island-sized killing machine. The game had just changed, and the hidden killers had revealed a terrifying new level of sophistication. There is no protocol for this. No training manual covers the moment you realize you are standing in the kill zone of a daisy-chained network of explosives. For Corporal Jensen and the men of Corrigan's squad, there is only a suffocating, absolute stillness. To move forward is suicide. To move back is to recross ground they now know is alive with triggers. Every man is frozen, a statue of mud-caked terror, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Corrigan's voice is a low, controlled hiss. Nobody moves. Muscle. He knows that panic is the real enemy now. One panicked step, one man diving for what he thinks is cover, and the whole squad vanishes. He makes a decision, the only one he can. Jensen, talk to me. Jensen doesn't look back. His eyes are still tracing the web. Lieutenant, we retrace. Exactly. Every footstep. And so begins the most terrifying walk of their lives. A retreat in their own footprints. Each man places his boot precisely into the mud print he made on the way in. It's a slow, agonizing process. A ballet of survival where a single misstep means oblivion. They can feel the unseen wires, inches from their ankles, humming with deadly potential. It takes them an hour to move 50 yards. When they finally reach the point where they believe the network begins, they don't feel relief. They feel violated. The enemy had gotten inside their heads. The jungle was no longer a place you moved through. It was a puzzle you had to solve, and the price of a wrong answer was your entire squad. The hard-won lessons of Guadalcanal, Bougainville, and Tarawa were written in blood and shrapnel. The Marine Corps began to adapt, institutionalizing the desperate field techniques of men like Jensen. Combat engineers, now called pioneers, were trained in explosive ordnance disposal. Grunts learned to probe the ground with their bayonets, feeling for the telltale resistance of a buried mine. They carried grappling hooks to snag tripwires from a distance, and Bangalore torpedoes, long pipes filled with explosives to blast a clear path through suspected minefields. They learned to never ever pick up a souvenir, to never assume a dead enemy soldier wasn't one last trap, and to never trust the obvious path. But the Japanese were learning too. For every countermeasure the Americans developed, the Japanese devised a more diabolical counter. And in the fall of 1944, the Marines would face the master's thesis of this deadly craft. The island was called Peleliu, September 15, 1944. White Beach, Peleliu. This is not a jungle. It is a nightmare of jagged, razor-sharp coral limestone, baked by a merciless sun. The island is small, just 6 square miles, but it is a fortress. The objective is, once again, an airfield. The pre-invasion naval bombardment, the heaviest of the Pacific War to date, had pounded the island for 3 days. The planners told the men of the 1st Marine Division, the same division that bled on Guadalcanal, to expect a tough but quick fight. 3, maybe 4 days. They were wrong. Colonel Kunio Nakagawa, the Japanese commander, was a student of the war. He knew the futility of trying to defend the beaches. He had watched the Americans' overwhelming firepower obliterate coastal defenses on other islands. So he did something different. He abandoned the banzai charge and the beach defense. He conceded the landing. His strategy was attrition. He would make the Americans pay for every inch of Peleliu in blood. He turned the island's jagged ridges and coral caves into a 500-cave interconnected defensive system, a subterranean fortress bristling with machine guns, mortars, and artillery, and lacing it all together, connecting every pillbox, every cave mouth, every trail, was the most sophisticated network of booby traps the world had ever seen. As the first wave of Marines hits White Beach, they are torn apart by pre-sighted artillery and machine gun fire. But as they push inland, past the burning wreckage of their landing craft, the other war begins. The traps here are not just grenades tied to vines. Nakagawa's engineers have had months to prepare. They have rigged 500-pound aerial bombs, salvaged from a nearby wrecked Japanese bomber, as massive landmines buried in the sand and coral. A single one could obliterate an entire amphibious tractor and its cargo of men. They use the Americans' own weapons against them. Unexploded American artillery shells are fitted with new sensitive fuses and buried along key routes. A Marine, seeing a familiar-looking shell, might pause for a fatal second, his brain processing the irony just as it detonates. The Japanese have learned to integrate the traps with their defenses. A tripwire doesn't just set off a grenade, it also sends up a flare, illuminating the area for a hidden heavy Nambu machine gun. A pressure plate doesn't just trigger a mine under your feet, it also electrically detonates a mortar shell positioned in the trees above you, creating an air burst that showers shrapnel down on the entire squad. Corporal Iron Mike Riley, a veteran of Cape Gloucester, leads his fire team off the beach. His men are moving cautiously, the lessons of past campaigns branded into their minds. They spot a tripwire and carefully cut it. Nothing happens. They move forward, a sense of relief washing over them. It was a dud, but it wasn't a dud. It was a decoy. Cutting the wire released the tension on a second hidden pressure release trigger 30 feet away, detonating a buried 150mm shell. The blast is colossal. It vaporizes 2 men and critically wounds 2 more. Riley is thrown against a rock outcropping, his ears screaming, his vision blurred. He has survived, but he understands the horrifying truth. The hidden killers of Peleliu were not just setting traps. They were thinking. They were anticipating the Marines' own tactics and turning their caution against them. The welcome mat had been rolled out, and it was woven from steel, cordite, and pure calculated malice. The true horror of Peleliu was not the beach, but the labyrinth that lay beyond it. The world rushes back to Corporal Riley in a wave of scorched air and the coppery smell of blood. The ringing in his ears subsides, replaced by the screams of the wounded and the frantic calls of corpsmen. He pushes himself up, his body a map of new aches. Where his 2 men had been standing, there is now only a blackened crater in the coral sand. The decoy trap had done more than just kill. It had shattered the most fundamental rule of survival they had learned. Trust your training. They had done everything right, identified the threat, neutralized it, and they had been punished for it. This was the brutal reality of Peleliu. The battle moved off the beaches and into the jagged, honeycombed ridges of the Umar Brogol Massif, a place the Marines would quickly christen Bloody Nose Ridge. Here, Colonel Nakagawa's defensive masterpiece was revealed. It was a fortress in 3 dimensions. Caves connected by tunnels provided interlocking fields of fire. A machine gun nest cleared with a grenade could be remanned in minutes by soldiers arriving through a hidden passage. And every approach, every gully, every seemingly safe piece of cover was seeded with traps designed with a new, terrifying level of psychological cunning. The fight for Bloody Nose Ridge devolved into a gruesome, intimate form of warfare. It was a slow, yard-by-yard advance, not against a visible enemy line, but against the island itself. The tactics became known as corkscrew and blowtorch. One team would lay down suppressing fire on a cave mouth with Browning automatic rifles, pinning the defenders. Then a Marine, his heart in his throat, would low-crawl forward, hugging the razor-sharp coral, carrying either a satchel charge of C2 explosive or the M2 flamethrower. Private First Class Jimmy Deacon Miller was on the nozzle of a flamethrower team. The weapon was a monster 70 pounds of steel and jellied gasoline. It was cumbersome, dangerous, and the life expectancy of a flamethrower operator was measured in minutes. But it was the only thing that worked. His team is assigned a pillbox dug into the base of a coral cliff face that has already claimed 6 Marines. As his riflemen open up, Deacon scrambles forward, the twin tanks heavy on his back. The air is alive with the snap of bullets ricocheting off the rock. He gets to within 20 yards, plants his feet, and pulls the trigger. A thick, roaring torrent of liquid fire engulfs the pillbox opening, clinging to the rock and pouring inside. The demonic shriek of burning men cuts through the din of battle. The machine gun falls silent. The squad waits. Silence. They've won. The platoon sergeant, a grizzled veteran named Gunny Ross, signals them forward. "Check for survivors," he orders, "and watch yourselves." 2 Marines, rifles at the ready, cautiously approach the blackened maw of the pillbox. The stench of burnt flesh and gasoline is overwhelming. Inside, they find 3 charred figures. A 4th, a Japanese officer, is slumped against the far wall, seemingly untouched by the flames. A gleaming Nambu pistol is in a holster at his side. A perfect souvenir. The younger Marine, barely a month in combat, takes a step toward him. "Don't you even think about it," Ross growls from the entrance. The warning comes too late. The Marine's boot nudges the officer's outstretched leg. There is a soft thump from beneath the body. It wasn't a sound of detonation, but of release. Ross's eyes go wide. He recognizes the trap, a last man device. The officer's body was holding down the spoon of a grenade, or worse, the pressure plate of a larger mine. Lifting the body released the trigger. "Get out!" he screams. The explosion is brutally efficient in the confined space. It doesn't just kill the 2 Marines inside. It turns the pillbox into a concrete coffin, the shrapnel and concussion waves ripping them to shreds. Gunny Ross is thrown back from the entrance, his face peppered with rock fragments. The hidden killers had struck again, turning a moment of victory into another round of death, weaponizing the Marine's own curiosity and the universal soldier's desire for a token of his survival. On Peleliu, even the enemy's dead were still fighting. Every corpse was a potential bomb. Every captured position was a potential trap. There was no safety, no sanctuary, and no end in sight. The battle for Peleliu, predicted to last 4 days, dragged on for over 2 months. The 1st Marine Division was bled white, suffering nearly 40% casualties and rendered combat ineffective. They had conquered the labyrinth, but the psychological scars of fighting an enemy who had turned the very ground into a weapon would last a lifetime. They had learned how to fight in hell, but the Japanese had learned something far more valuable: how to build it. The workshop on Peleliu had been a prototype. On Iwo Jima, they would witness the factory. February 19, 1945, Red Beach 1, Iwo Jima. This is not jungle. This is not coral. This is a primeval landscape, a vision of a dead world. The ground is a coarse, black, volcanic ash that grips the boots and swallows the wheels of jeeps and trucks. It offers no traction, no stability, and absolutely no cover. The air stinks of sulfur, a rotten egg smell that seeps from volcanic vents and catches in the back of the throat. Dominating the horizon is Mount Suribachi, a dormant volcano that looms over the beaches like a silent, malevolent god. And it is watching. Inside that mountain and throughout the entire 8-square-mile island, Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi presides over his creation. He is a formidable opponent, brilliant, pragmatic, and utterly ruthless. He had studied the reports from Peleliu with clinical detachment. He saw Colonel Nakagawa's strategy not as a failure, but as a successful experiment in attrition. Kuribayashi's orders to his 21,000 men were chillingly simple. There will be no surrender. There will be no glorious banzai charges. Your objective is to kill 10 Americans before you die. To that end, he had turned Iwo Jima into the most formidable fortress in human history. For months, his men had tunneled. They carved 11 miles of interconnected corridors and 700 rooms deep beneath the volcanic rock, impervious to the heaviest naval shells and aerial bombs. This was not a collection of caves. It was a subterranean city of death, complete with command centers, hospitals, and barracks. Every pillbox, every blockhouse, every spider hole on the surface was connected to this underground network, and the surface itself was the trigger for a trap of unimaginable scale. Kuribayashi had not just booby-trapped the paths, he had booby-trapped the entire island. Sergeant Frank Petrelli, commander of an M4 Sherman tank nicknamed Clankin' Cassie, feels the turret shudder as another salvo of naval gunfire screams overhead and impacts the slopes of Suribachi. Through his periscope, the beach is chaos. Marines of the 4th and 5th Divisions struggle through the black ash, weighed down by gear, as pre-registered mortar and artillery fire rains down from the high ground. For them, it's a meat grinder. For Petrelli, encased in 60 tons of American steel, there is a feeling of detached power. His job is to get off this beach, knock out the pillboxes, and support the grunts. "Push forward, Cal," he barks to his driver. "Find some hard ground." The Sherman lurches, its tracks churning uselessly in the soft ash. They are a massive, slow-moving target. Infantrymen huddle behind them, using the tanks as the only cover available. As they crawl up the first terrace of the beach, Petrelli's gunner identifies a concrete pillbox spitting machine gun fire. "Gunner, traverse left. He loaded. On that pillbox, fire!" The 75mm cannon booms, and the pillbox disappears in a cloud of dust and concrete. A small victory. But as Clankin' Cassie crests the terrace, the world dissolves into white light and a sound that is not heard, but felt deep in the bones. The tank is lifted from the ground. The entire 60-ton vehicle is thrown into the air as if it were a child's toy. A massive concussive force rips through the crew compartment, turning steel plate into shrapnel. Petrelli is slammed against the turret ceiling, his world reduced to a maelstrom of fire, twisting metal, and the screams of his crew. He had no way of knowing it. But Kuribayashi's engineers had spent months planting their most powerful traps specifically for tanks like his. They had taken naval mines, 500-pound aerial bombs, and even torpedo warheads and buried them deep beneath the avenues of approach from the beaches. They were pressure detonated, but not by a man's weight. They were calibrated to be triggered only by the immense ground pressure of a Sherman tank. They were invisible, undetectable, and utterly devastating. An encounter with one was not a matter of survival, it was a matter of instant annihilation. As the smoke clears, infantrymen who had been sheltering behind the tank stare in horror. There is only a burning, blackened hulk, its turret blown clean off, sitting in a vast crater. The hidden killers of Iwo Jima were not targeting individuals anymore. They were hunting machines. This was a new level of industrial-scale slaughter, where one trap could erase a tank and its 5-man crew in a single, thunderous heartbeat. For the Marines on the Black Sands, the realization was stark and terrifying. Their most powerful weapon on the battlefield was just another target, and the ground beneath their feet was the most dangerous enemy of all. Thank you for watching.